The howl of the winter wind was all that could be heard across the desolate Wyoming plains, as Ezekiel Evans urged his exhausted horse forward through the blinding snowstorm of January 1878. His fingers, numb inside his leather gloves, clutched the reins as he squinted against the relentless onslaught of icy flakes. "Just a bit further, Mercury," he murmured to his faithful bay stallion. "We'll find shelter soon." Ezekiel, or Zeke as most folks called him, had been riding for nearly 14 hours, making his way back to his small ranch after delivering a herd of cattle to the neighboring town. The sudden blizzard had caught him by surprise, turning what should have been a 5-hour journey into a perilous struggle against nature's fury. At 32, Zeke was accustomed to the harsh realities of frontier life. Orphaned at 16, he had worked as a ranch hand for years before saving enough to purchase his own modest spread. He'd built everything with his own 2 hands: the cabin, the barn, the corral. It wasn't much, but it was his, earned through sweat and determination. As Mercury trudged forward, Zeke noticed something unusual on the trail ahead, a dark shape against the pristine whiteness of the snow. Initially, he thought it might be a fallen branch or perhaps even a wounded animal, but as he drew closer, his heart nearly stopped. "Good Lord," he whispered, immediately dismounting and trudging through the knee-deep snow. There, partially covered by the rapidly accumulating snowfall, lay a bundle wrapped in a tattered blanket. Kneeling beside it, Zeke gently pulled back the frost-covered fabric to reveal the face of a small boy, no more than a year old, his lips blue from cold but still breathing shallow breaths. "Who would leave you out here?" Zeke muttered in disbelief, quickly scanning the area for any sign of others. There were none, just endless white in every direction. Without hesitation, Zeke unbuttoned his heavy sheepskin coat, the one he'd saved 3 months' wages to purchase last winter. He carefully lifted the child, who stirred slightly but didn't wake, and cradled him against his chest before wrapping the coat around them both. The warmth of Zeke's body against the child seemed to ease the boy's shivering. "Hang on, little one," Zeke said, his voice gruff with emotion as he mounted Mercury with one arm, keeping the child secure against him with the other. "I'm taking you home." The journey back to his ranch was arduous, the storm intensifying with each passing minute. Zeke hunched over the child, using his body as a shield against the biting wind and snow. Mercury, sensing the urgency, pushed forward with renewed determination. By the time the outline of Zeke's cabin came into view, darkness had fallen completely. The small structure, with smoke rising from its chimney thanks to the banked fire he'd left that morning, had never looked so welcoming. Zeke dismounted carefully, keeping the boy wrapped securely in his coat, and led Mercury into the barn. He couldn't properly tend to his horse now. The child needed warmth immediately, but he removed the saddle one-handed and threw a blanket over Mercury's back. "Sorry, old friend," he said, patting the horse's neck. "I'll be back to properly care for you soon." Inside the cabin, Zeke quickly stoked the dying embers in the fireplace, adding kindling and logs until a robust fire blazed. Only then did he unwrap the child from his coat and the tattered blanket. The boy was dressed in simple clothes, a small shirt and pants that were wholly inadequate for the brutal winter conditions. Miraculously, though dangerously cold, the child appeared uninjured. As the warmth of the cabin began to thaw the boy, he opened his eyes startlingly blue against his pale face and began to cry weakly. "There now," Zeke said softly, unsure how to comfort a child but trying nonetheless. "You're safe now, little one." He warmed some milk from his small supply and, using a clean cloth dipped in the liquid, managed to get the boy to suckle a bit. It was crude, but it seemed to help as the child's cries subsided to occasional whimpers. Looking down at the boy now resting in his arms, Zeke felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. Who would abandon a child in such conditions? Was the mother nearby, perhaps herself a victim of the storm? The questions plagued him, but they would have to wait. Tonight, keeping this small life safe was all that mattered. I don't know your name or where you came from, Zeke said softly, but you're safe now, I promise you that. As the night deepened, Zeke fashioned a makeshift bed for the boy from blankets near the fire and managed to attend to Mercury properly. When he returned, the child was sleeping peacefully, his breathing regular and his color much improved. Zeke sat in his single chair, watching the rise and fall of the boy's chest, wondering what daybreak would bring. He had no experience with children, no way to care for an infant long-term, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that finding this child wasn't mere chance. When morning arrived, the storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine white landscape and crystal-clear blue sky. Zeke fed the boy more warmed milk and assessed his situation. He needed help, and the nearest town, Timber Creek, was a good 4-hour ride in these conditions. Bundling the boy securely in his own blankets and his coat, Zeke prepared for the journey. He fashioned a sling from a spare shirt to keep the child against his chest, leaving his hands free to handle the reins. "Let's find you some proper help, little one," he said, securing his hat and mounting Mercury once again. The ride to Timber Creek was slow and careful. The boy, seemingly content against the warmth of Zeke's chest, alternated between sleeping and observing the world with curious eyes. Occasionally, he would grasp Zeke's finger with surprising strength, causing an unexpected surge of protectiveness in the cowboy's heart. Timber Creek was a modest frontier town with a main street lined by the essential businesses: a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, the sheriff's office, and, thankfully, a doctor's residence. It was to this last building that Zeke headed first, Dr. Harold Miller was a gruff man in his 50s who had seen just about everything frontier life could throw at a person. Yet even he seemed surprised when Zeke entered with a baby strapped to his chest. "Found him abandoned in the snow during yesterday's blizzard," Zeke explained, carefully unwrapping the child for the doctor's examination. "About 4 hours northeast of here, along Elkhorn Trail, Doctor." Miller examined the boy thoroughly, his experienced hands gentle as he checked for frostbite or other injuries. "He's remarkably healthy considering," the doctor finally declared. "Someone wrapped him well before leaving him. He's approximately 10 months old, I'd estimate." "Do you know of anyone missing a child?" Zeke asked, relieved at the doctor's assessment. Dr. Miller shook his head. "No reports of missing children, but there was word of a wagon train passing through last week, immigrants heading west. They might have been caught in the storm." "And left a child behind." Zeke couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. "Perhaps not willingly," Dr. Miller said gravely. "The storm was fierce. Could be the parents perished and someone found the child, tried to bring him to town but couldn't make it." The explanation made sense, though it did little to ease the anger Zeke felt at the thought of the boy alone in the snow. "What happens to him now?" Zeke asked, watching as the child played with the stethoscope the doctor had momentarily set down. "Well, there's no orphanage in Timber Creek, Doctor." Miller explained. "Nearest one is in Cheyenne, a good 3 days' ride from here. Sheriff can send a telegram, but it'll be at least a week before anyone could come for him." Zeke nodded slowly, a decision forming in his mind that surprised even him. "I'll keep him until then," he said firmly, Doctor. Miller raised an eyebrow. "You, a bachelor rancher with no experience with children?" "I found him," Zeke replied simply. "Seems right I should see this through." After a moment the doctor nodded. "Very well, you'll need supplies, proper milk, some clothing, diapers," armed with a list from Doctor Miller. Zeke made his way to the general store, the boy once again secured against his chest. The store was busy with the usual Saturday traffic, ranchers and townspeople stocking up on supplies. As Zeke awkwardly gathered the items on the doctor's list, he became aware of curious glances and whispered comments. It wasn't every day a known bachelor cowboy walked around with an infant, after all. "You need help finding something?" a gentle female voice asked. Zeke turned to find a young woman watching him with an amused smile. She was perhaps in her mid-20s, with chestnut hair pulled back in a practical bun and warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. "I'm looking for, Zeke consulted his list: infant clothing and soft blankets. "I see that," she replied, her eyes moving to the child who was now awake and observing her with interest. "And who is this little gentleman?" Zeke realized he had no name for the boy. I found him actually. In the storm yesterday, abandoned." The woman's smile faded, replaced by a look of concern. "How awful." She stepped closer, her fingers gently brushing the boy's cheek. "He seems to have taken to you, though." Indeed, the child was contentedly grasping Zeke's shirt, showing none of the fear one might expect from an infant with a stranger. "I'm Bethany Kelley," she introduced herself. "I teach at the school here." "Ezekiel Evans," he replied. "Most folks call me Zeke." "I have a small ranch northeast of town." Bethany nodded. "I know of it. You brought in that injured mare to my father last spring. He's the blacksmith." Recognition dawned on Zeke. "You're Thomas Kelly's daughter. I remember him mentioning you'd returned from schooling back east." "That's right." "I came back last year to teach." She gestured to his list. "Now, let me help you find what you need. You look a bit overwhelmed." With Bethany's assistance, Zeke gathered the necessary supplies much more efficiently than he would have on his own. She knew exactly which items would be most useful and added several that weren't on the doctor's list, but that she insisted would be essential. "Have you thought about what you'll call him?" she asked as they approached the counter with their selections. Zeke looked down at the boy, who was now chewing contentedly on the collar of his shirt. "I haven't," he admitted. "Seems presumptuous to name him when he might already have one." Bethany nodded understandingly. "But you need to call him something in the meantime." Zeke considered this as the shopkeeper tallied their purchases. "Matthew," he decided finally. "It was my father's name." "Matthew," Bethany repeated with a smile. "It suits him." After paying for the supplies, Zeke found himself reluctant to part ways with Bethany. Her presence was comforting in the face of his new and unexpected responsibility. "Miss Kelley," he began hesitantly, "I appreciate your help today. I'm not exactly experienced with children." Bethany's eyes softened. "Few men are until they have their own," she said kindly. "You're doing a good thing, Mr. Evans." Before Zeke could respond, the boy Matthew, as he'd now named him, began to fuss. His little face scrunching up in what Zeke was quickly learning preceded a full-blown cry. "He's probably hungry," Bethany said, reaching into one of the packages they'd just purchased. She extracted a small bottle and a tin of milk powder. "There's a pump out back where you can get water. I can show you how to prepare it." Grateful for her continued assistance, Zeke followed Bethany to the back of the store where she efficiently prepared a bottle of milk. The expertise with which she handled the task made Zeke acutely aware of how unprepared he was for caring for an infant. "You seem to know a lot about babies," he observed as she tested the temperature of the milk on her wrist. Bethany smiled, handing him the bottle. "I helped raise my younger siblings after my mother passed. The youngest was just a baby at the time." As Zeke awkwardly tried to position the bottle for Matthew, Bethany gently adjusted his hold on both the child and the bottle. "Like this," she demonstrated. "Support his head a bit more. There you go." Matthew latched onto the bottle eagerly, his tiny hands coming up to rest against the glass. "He was hungry," Zeke said, surprised by the rush of satisfaction he felt at successfully feeding the boy. "Children usually are," Bethany replied with a soft laugh. "Especially at this age, they're growing so quickly." They stood there for a moment, Zeke feeding Matthew while Bethany watched with an approving smile. It was a strangely intimate moment, one that felt both foreign and somehow right to Zeke. "I should get him back to the ranch," Zeke said finally, though he made no immediate move to leave. Bethany nodded. "It's a long ride and he'll need a proper place to sleep tonight." She hesitated, then added, "If you need any help or advice, my father's place is just at the end of Main Street, the red house behind the smithy." "I appreciate that, Miss Kelley," Zeke replied, genuinely grateful for the offer. "Bethany, please," she insisted. If you're going to be caring for a child, even temporarily, we should dispense with formalities. Zeke smiled, the first real smile since finding Matthew. Bethany it is, then. The ride back to his ranch was filled with new concerns and considerations. His cabin, perfectly adequate for a single man, suddenly seemed woefully unprepared for a child. It was drafty in places, with hard floors and a distinct lack of anything that might be considered child-friendly. Yet as Matthew slept against his chest, Zeke found himself making mental plans for improvements: a proper sleeping area for the boy, securing loose objects that small hands might reach, perhaps even a rocking chair like the one his own mother had used. These thoughts surprised him. It had been less than a day since he'd found Matthew, and already he was thinking beyond the temporary arrangement. The authorities would eventually come for the boy, find him a proper home with a family. That was the right thing, Zeke reminded himself. A bachelor rancher was no substitute for a mother and father. But as they reached his property and Mercury carried them up the path to the cabin, Zeke couldn't help but feel a sense of rightness in bringing Matthew home. The next few days established a tentative routine. Zeke learned through trial and error how to change diapers, prepare bottles, and interpret the different cries that signaled hunger, discomfort, or sleepiness. His ranch chores took longer with a baby to tend to, but he managed by carrying Matthew with him for the safer tasks and creating a secure space in the cabin for the boy while he handled the more dangerous work. On the third day, as Zeke was chopping wood with Matthew bundled up and watching from a nest of blankets on the porch, he spotted a rider approaching. It was Bethany, wrapped in a heavy coat and scarf against the winter chill. "Good morning," she called as she dismounted, leading her horse to the hitching post. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I was worried about how you two were faring." Zeke set down his axe, oddly pleased by her appearance. "No intrusion at all. We're managing, though I won't pretend it's been easy." Bethany approached the bundle on the porch, her face lighting up as Matthew recognized her and gave a toothless grin. "Hello there, young man," she cooed, kneeling to adjust his blankets. "You look well cared for." "I've been following your advice," Zeke admitted, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold. "Though I think he'd prefer someone who knows what they're doing." Bethany looked up at him, her expression serious. "Don't sell yourself short, Zeke. Many fathers with years of experience aren't as attentive as you've been with a child you've only just met." Her words warmed him more than they should have. "Would you like to come inside? I can offer coffee, at least." Inside the cabin, Zeke was suddenly self-conscious of its sparse furnishings and bachelor simplicity. He'd made efforts to clean and organize since bringing Matthew home, but it was still clearly a man's domain with few comforts. Bethany, however, seemed to approve as she looked around. "You've made it safe for him," she observed, noting how he'd moved dangerous items to higher shelves and created a small play area near the fire. As they sipped coffee with Matthew contentedly playing with a wooden spoon on a blanket between them, Bethany explained the real purpose of her visit. "I spoke with Sheriff Collins yesterday," she said. "He sent telegrams about Matthew, but with the recent storms, communication has been difficult. It could be weeks before we learn anything about where he came from." Zeke nodded, having expected as much. "And the orphanage in Cheyenne." Bethany's expression tightened slightly. "They're overcrowded already from a recent influenza outbreak that left many children parentless. They've asked if local arrangements can be made for the time being." "So he stays with me," Zeke concluded, surprised by the relief he felt. "If you're willing," Bethany confirmed. "The sheriff was concerned about a single man caring for an infant, but I vouched for you." She looked slightly embarrassed at this admission. "I hope that was all right." "I appreciate your confidence," Zeke said sincerely. "Though I'm not sure it's entirely deserved." Bethany smiled. "Then let me help you earn it. I can come by after school a few days a week, show you some things that might make caring for him easier." The offer was generous, and Zeke knew he should refuse. He had already imposed on her kindness too much. Yet the thought of regular visits from Bethany was undeniably appealing, and Matthew clearly benefited from her experienced care. "If you're sure it wouldn't be too much trouble," he said finally. "Not at all," she assured him. "Besides, he's quite charming company." She tickled Matthew's stomach, eliciting a delighted giggle that filled the cabin with warmth. True to her word, Bethany began visiting the ranch 3 times a week. She would arrive after school, sometimes bringing small gifts for Matthew: a hand-knitted cap, a wooden toy from her father's workshop, once even a small picture book that she read to him while Zeke prepared dinner. These visits quickly became the highlight of Zeke's week. Bethany brought a lightness to the cabin that had been missing since he'd lived there. She was intelligent and well-spoken, with strong opinions about education and community that she expressed with passionate articulation. Yet she was also practical and down-to-earth, unafraid of hard work and quick to roll up her sleeves to help with whatever task needed doing. As winter deepened, so did their friendship. Zeke found himself sharing stories of his parents' deaths from fever when he was 16. His years working for various ranches across the territory. His dream of building his modest spread into something substantial. Bethany, in turn, spoke of her time studying in Boston, her decision to return to Timber Creek despite offers to teach in more established Eastern schools, her love for the openness and possibility of the frontier despite its hardships. Matthew thrived under their combined care. By late February, he was pulling himself up on furniture and attempting his first hesitant steps while holding onto Zeke's fingers. His vocabulary consisted mostly of babbling, but he clearly recognized both Zeke and Bethany, greeting them with excited gestures and sounds that were unique to each. One evening in early March, as a late winter storm howled outside, Bethany stayed later than usual, reluctant to make the ride back to town in such conditions. "You should stay the night," Zeke suggested as he stoked the fire. "I can sleep in the barn. The storm should pass by morning." Bethany hesitated, clearly weighing propriety against practicality. "People would talk," she said finally, though her tone suggested this wasn't her primary concern. "People always talk," Zeke replied with a shrug. "Better that than you risking the ride in this weather." In the end, practicality won. Zeke prepared his bed for Bethany and made himself a comfortable enough place in the barn's small attached room where he kept supplies. Before retiring, they put Matthew to bed together, a routine that had developed naturally over the weeks of Bethany's visits. "Sleep well, little man," Zeke said softly, brushing the boy's hair back from his forehead. "Sweet dreams, Matthew," Bethany added, tucking the blanket around him securely. As they stood together watching the child drift off to sleep, Zeke was struck by how natural it all felt, the 3 of them together in the warmth of the cabin while the storm raged outside. It felt like family, a concept he had nearly forgotten after so many years alone. The next morning, Zeke awoke to the sound of laughter. Entering the cabin, he found Bethany sitting on the floor with Matthew, who was attempting to stack wooden blocks only to knock them down with obvious delight. "Good morning," Bethany greeted him, her hair loose around her shoulders in a way he'd never seen before. "We tried to be quiet, but someone is rather excited about his new game." Zeke couldn't help but smile at the domestic scene before him. "It's a fine way to wake up," he said honestly. Over breakfast, a comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by Matthew's occasional babbling and the normal sounds of eating. It was Bethany who finally spoke the words that had been hovering unspoken between them for weeks. "What happens when they come for him?" She asked quietly, watching as Matthew enthusiastically mashed eggs between his fingers. Zeke had been asking himself the same question with increasing frequency. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've tried not to think about it." "But you have," Bethany said perceptively. "I can see it when you look at him sometimes." Zeke nodded slowly. "I never thought about having a family," he confessed. "My life was my work, my ranch. It seemed enough, but now it's hard to imagine life without him," Bethany finished for him. "Yes." The single word carried the weight of emotions Zeke wasn't accustomed to expressing. Bethany reached across the table, her hand covering his. "Have you considered making it permanent, adopting him?" The question hung in the air between them. Of course, Zeke had considered it increasingly so as weeks passed with no word about Matthew's origins. But he dismissed the idea as impractical, perhaps even selfish. "A child needs a mother," he said finally. "A proper family." Bethany's hand tightened on his. "A child needs love and stability, Zeke. You've given him both." "For now," Zeke agreed. "But what about when he's older, when he needs more than I can give him alone?" The implication of his words wasn't lost on either of them. Bethany withdrew her hand slowly, her cheeks coloring slightly. "That's a consideration, certainly." The ride back to town later that morning was quieter than usual, both lost in their own thoughts. At the edge of town, Bethany turned to him with a determined expression. "Come to dinner tomorrow," she said. "Bring Matthew. My father has been asking to meet you both properly." Zeke understood the significance of the invitation. Thomas Kelley was well respected in Timber Creek, and his approval would mean a great deal if Zeke were to pursue the path now presenting itself. "We'll be there," he promised. The following evening found Zeke more nervous than he could remember being in years. He'd bathed both himself and Matthew thoroughly, dressed them in their best clothes, which for Zeke meant his one good shirt and the vest he wore only for special occasions, and even attempted to tame his usually unruly hair. Thomas Kelley's home was modest but well-maintained, with the comfortable feel of a place that had seen generations of family life. The blacksmith himself was a barrel-chested man with the same warm eyes as his daughter, though his were set in a face weathered by years of working with fire and iron. "So you're the cowboy who's taken to raising a child," Thomas said after introductions were made, his tone gruff but not unkind. "Didn't expect that when you brought that mare in last spring." "Life has a way of surprising us, sir," Zeke replied, adjusting Matthew on his hip. Thomas studied him for a moment, then nodded as if confirming something to himself. "That it does, son, that it does." Dinner was a pleasant affair, with Bethany's two younger siblings, Emma, 17, and Daniel, 15, asking eager questions about ranch life, and Matthew, who charmed everyone by attempting to share his mashed potatoes with Thomas's old hound dog. After the meal, while the younger Kelleys cleared the table, Thomas invited Zeke to join him on the porch despite the evening chill. Matthew had fallen asleep in Bethany's arms, comfortable and content in the warm house. "My Beth tells me you're considering keeping the boy," Thomas said without preamble once they were settled with cups of strong coffee. "If no family comes forward, yes," Zeke confirmed. "Though I understand it might not be the ideal situation." Thomas took a long sip of his coffee before responding. "When my wife died, leaving me with 3 children to raise, folks said the same thing. A blacksmith with no wife, how could he possibly manage? Beth was 12 then, already trying to be the woman of the house. The younger two were just little things." Zeke listened respectfully, sensing there was a point to this reminiscence. "What folks didn't understand," Thomas continued, "was that it isn't about being ideal, it's about love and commitment. I loved my children, was committed to giving them the best life I could. From what Beth tells me, you love that boy like he was your own flesh and blood." "I do," Zeke admitted, the simple truth of it almost overwhelming. Thomas nodded again. "Then that's what matters most." He paused, glancing back through the window where Bethany could be seen gently rocking Matthew. "Of course, having help never hurts." The implication was clear, and Zeke felt his face warm despite the cold. "Your daughter has been invaluable," he said carefully. "I'm not sure we would have managed without her." "Beth has always had a big heart," Thomas agreed, "but I've never seen her as happy as she's been these past weeks, riding out to your place helping with the boy." He fixed Zeke with a direct gaze. "She's special, my Beth. Educated, could have stayed in the East with all its comforts, chose to come back here because she believes in building something meaningful, even if it's harder. She's an extraordinary woman, Zeke agreed sincerely. That she is, Thomas said, satisfaction evident in his tone. And she deserves a man who recognizes that, who will build a life with her that honors her choice to be here. The conversation shifted to more general topics after that, but the message had been clear. Thomas Kelley would not object if Zeke's intentions toward his daughter became formal. Inside, as they prepared to leave, Bethany carefully transferred the sleeping Matthew to Zeke's arms. Their faces were close for a moment, and Zeke was struck by a powerful desire to close the distance between them. "Thank you for dinner," he said instead, his voice low. "Thank you for coming," she replied, her eyes holding his. "Both of you." The ride home was peaceful, Matthew sleeping securely against Zeke's chest while the stars shone brilliantly in the clear night sky. Decisions that had seemed complicated now felt remarkably clear, as if the path forward had been illuminated by the evening's conversations. 2 days later, Zeke rode into town with Matthew, ostensibly to purchase supplies but with a more important mission in mind. His first stop was the small jewelry shop, where he selected a modest ring with a single pearl elegant in its simplicity, much like Bethany herself. His second stop was the sheriff's office, where he formally filed papers to begin the adoption process for Matthew. Sheriff Collins, initially skeptical, had apparently been influenced by Bethany's endorsement and the visible bond between Zeke and the child. "It's unusual," the sheriff admitted as he stamped the preliminary documents, "but not unheard of. Judge Williams will want to interview you when he's next in town, probably within the month." "I'll be ready," Zeke assured him, determination evident in his voice. The final stop was the schoolhouse, where Bethany was just dismissing her students for the day. She smiled widely when she saw them waiting at the bottom of the steps. "This is a pleasant surprise," she said, her eyes moving curiously between Zeke's unusually formal appearance and Matthew's excited greeting. "We were hoping you might join us for a walk," Zeke said, suddenly nervous despite all his preparations. Bethany agreed readily, and they strolled together toward the small park at the edge of town, Matthew walking between them, his small hands held securely in theirs. It was, Zeke thought, a perfect picture of what could be. At the park, they sat on a bench while Matthew explored the new spring grass with fascinated concentration. Zeke took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "Bethany," he began, turning to face her directly, "these past months have been the most transformative of my life. Finding Matthew changed everything I thought I knew about myself and what I wanted, and meeting you." He paused, searching for the right words. "Meeting you showed me possibilities I never dared to imagine." Bethany's eyes widened slightly, a flush spreading across her cheeks. "I've filed adoption papers for Matthew," Zeke continued. "I want to give him a permanent home, a family. But I realize that to truly give him everything he deserves, he needs more than just me." Reaching into his pocket, he withdrew the small box containing the pearl ring. "He needs a mother who is kind and patient and loving, and I need a partner, a wife who sees the value in the life I'm trying to build." Opening the box, he held it out to her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Bethany Kelley, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife, of helping me raise Matthew as our son, of building a family and a future together?" Tears filled Bethany's eyes as she looked from the ring to Zeke's earnest face. "Are you certain?" she whispered. "This is all happening so quickly." "Some things you just know," Zeke replied simply. "I know I love you, Bethany. I know we're good together, the three of us. The rest we can figure out as we go." A radiant smile broke through her tears. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and sure. "Yes, I will marry you, Ezekiel Evans." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Matthew tottered over to them, sensing the emotional moment. Zeke lifted him up, settling the boy between them on the bench. "What do you think, Matthew?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "How would you like Bethany to be your mother?" Matthew looked between them with his bright blue eyes, then reached out one hand to each of them, pulling them closer together as if completing a circle. It was answer enough. The wedding took place that June, a joyful community celebration that brought together the townspeople of Timber Creek and neighboring ranchers who had come to respect Zeke's hard work and integrity. Judge Williams, who had approved Matthew's adoption the month before, performed the ceremony in the town square beneath an arch of spring flowers. Bethany was radiant in a simple white dress with blue ribbons that matched her new son's eyes. Zeke, standing tall and proud in a new suit, could hardly believe his good fortune as he watched his bride walk toward him on her father's arm, Matthew toddling alongside them as the honorary ring bearer. "Who would have thought," Thomas Kelley said as he placed his daughter's hand in Zeke's, "that a baby left in the snow would bring such happiness to so many?" Indeed, as Zeke and Bethany exchanged vows with Matthew secure between them, it seemed impossible that their story had begun with such a tragic abandonment. Yet life on the frontier was full of such unlikely turns, hardship transformed into blessing, loss giving way to new beginnings, strangers becoming family. By the following winter, the Evans Ranch had expanded significantly. With Thomas Kelley's help and investment, Zeke had purchased adjacent land and increased his cattle herd. The cabin had been enlarged to include a proper bedroom for Matthew and a spacious kitchen where Bethany often taught neighboring women's children alongside her son. On a snowy December evening, almost exactly 2 years after Zeke had found Matthew in the storm, the three of them sat before the fireplace in their comfortable home. Matthew, now a robust 3-year-old with an endless supply of energy and questions, was finally growing sleepy as Bethany read him a story watching them. Zeke reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. The desperate ride through the blizzard, the tiny bundle in the snow, the tentative early days of caring for an infant with no experience to guide him all had led to this peaceful scene of domestic contentment. "Papa," Matthew said suddenly, interrupting his own story, "tell me again how you found me." It was a frequent request, one that Zeke and Bethany had decided to honor with honest but age-appropriate answers. They believed Matthew had a right to know his own story, even the parts that were painful. "Well," Zeke began, lifting the boy onto his lap, "I was riding home through the biggest snowstorm you ever saw when I spotted something strange on the trail." As he recounted the now familiar tale, ending with how he had wrapped Matthew in his coat and carried him home, Bethany reached over to take his hand, her fingers warm and secure around his. "And then," she continued the story as she always did, "your papa brought you home and learned how to take care of you all by himself. And then he met me, and we both fell in love with each other and with you. And now we're a family," Matthew concluded sleepily, the ending he liked best. "That's right," Zeke confirmed, his heart full as he looked at his wife and son. "Now we're a family forever." Outside, snow began to fall softly, covering the land in a pristine blanket of white, much like the night that had changed their lives. But this time, no one was alone in the cold. Inside the warm cabin, love had built a shelter stronger than any storm could challenge, a testament to the healing power of compassion, courage, and the unexpected paths that sometimes lead us home.